The small human ship called Resilience slowly moved into position around the alien planet. It looked tiny and weak compared to what everyone else had brought to this important meeting. The other alien races weren't hiding their surprise and confusion at what they were seeing. The Vorthan Empire had arrived with 300 massive warships lined up in perfect formation, their dark hulls bristling with enough weapons to level entire cities. Their ships were so large that each one could probably hold a small town inside. The Nexari coalition wasn't going to be outdone either. They had brought their famous crystal ships that sparkled like jewels in space, each one a masterpiece of alien engineering that cost more than most planets made in a year. But humanity? They sent one small ship that looked like it might be used to deliver mail between planets. Admiral Thok stood on the observation deck of the space station, his 4 yellow eyes focused on the pathetic human vessel. He was a massive creature, even by alien standards, with thick grey skin that looked like it could stop bullets. His species, the Kreks, were known throughout the galaxy for their military might and their complete lack of patience for weakness. "Look at that thing," Thok said to his assistant, pointing one of his 6 arms toward the human ship. His voice was deep and rough, like rocks grinding together. One ship, just one tiny ship. He made a sound that might have been laughter, but it sounded more like a rock slide. Either these humans are the biggest idiots in the entire galaxy, or they have some kind of death wish we don't understand. His assistant, a smaller Krex named Vrak, nodded eagerly. "Perhaps they simply don't understand how important this meeting is, Admiral. Maybe their primitive brains can't grasp the concept of showing proper respect." The news was already spreading across the galaxy faster than light. Every major news network was covering the human arrival, and none of them were being kind about it. The most popular show in the galaxy, Galactic Tonight, spent 15 minutes just making jokes about the lonely human ship floating by itself. "Ladies, gentlemen, and various other life forms," the host announced with barely contained laughter. "Humanity has just shown us exactly how seriously they take galactic politics. While everyone else brought fleets that could conquer solar systems, Earth sent what appears to be a pizza delivery ship." The studio audience, made up of dozens of different alien species, erupted in laughter and strange alien sounds that passed for amusement. Some were clicking their claws together, others were making high-pitched whistling noises, and a few were changing colors rapidly in what seemed to be their version of giggling. Other news shows were being even meaner. Military experts from various alien civilizations appeared on talk shows, shaking their heads in disbelief. "This shows that humans simply don't understand how the galaxy works," said General Zorth of the Mandarian fleet. "In space, size matters. Power matters. Respect is earned through strength, not through sending a single ship that my personal shuttle could probably destroy." The social media networks that connected the galaxy were on fire with memes and jokes about the human ship. Pictures of the Resilience next to massive alien dreadnoughts were shared millions of times, usually with captions like, "When you didn't read the assignment," or "One of these things is not like the others." Even the usually professional diplomatic channels couldn't hide their amusement. Ambassadors from various worlds were sending private messages to each other, wondering if humanity was playing some kind of elaborate joke, or if they really were as naive as they appeared to be. The transport shuttle's doors opened with a soft hiss and Captain Lee Minho stepped out onto the massive alien space station. He moved with the easy confidence of someone taking a casual stroll through his neighborhood, completely unbothered by the fact that he was surrounded by creatures that could probably tear him apart with their bare claws. Behind him came his team, and it was almost embarrassing how small it was. Ambassador Park Jiu, a woman in her 40s who looked like she could be anyone's friendly aunt, smoothed down her plain black business suit. Commander Kim Doyen followed next, a tall man who carried nothing more dangerous than a simple data pad that probably cost less than most aliens spent on lunch. Finally came Engineer Yoon Haeun, a younger woman who seemed completely fascinated by the strange alien architecture around them, tilting her head back to stare at the ceiling like a tourist visiting a museum. That was it. 4 humans, total. Compare that to what everyone else had brought, and it was almost funny. The Vorthan delegation had arrived with over 200 members, including military advisors, economic specialists, cultural attachés, security teams, and even their own personal chefs. They moved through the station like a small army, their boots clicking in perfect unison on the metal floors. The Nexari weren't much better. Their group of crystal-skinned diplomats numbered in the hundreds as well, each one wearing robes that probably cost more than most human families made in a year. Yeah. They glided through the corridors with an air of superiority that made it clear they thought everyone else was beneath them. Even the smaller alien civilizations had brought impressive teams. The lizard-like Saurians had 50 delegates, the floating gas beings called ethereals had 30, and even the insect-like Chitinians had managed to bring 25 representatives, each one clicking and buzzing in their strange language. But the humans, 4 people who looked like they were heading to a business meeting on Earth. The alien dignitaries couldn't hide their amusement and contempt. Groups of them clustered together, pointing at the tiny human delegation and making sounds that were clearly laughter in their various languages. Some were more obvious about it than others. A group of Vorthan officers made no attempt to lower their voices as they discussed the pathetic human showing. Ambassador Park seemed completely unaware of the hostile attention, or maybe she just didn't care. She walked through the crowd with a pleasant smile on her face, nodding politely to aliens who were openly mocking her. When a particularly large Krex warrior deliberately stepped into her path, trying to intimidate her, she simply said, "Excuse me," and walked around him like he was a piece of furniture. Commander Kim was equally calm, scrolling through information on his datapad, as if he was reading the morning news instead of preparing for one of the most important diplomatic meetings in galactic history. Every now and then, he would make a note with a simple stylus, completely ignoring the aliens who were staring at him like he was some kind of strange zoo animal. Engineer Yoon was having the time of her life, completely oblivious to the tension around her. She kept stopping to examine the alien technology built into the station walls, occasionally pulling out a small scanner to take readings. When a group of Nexari diplomats blocked her path, she politely asked them to move so she could get a better look at what appeared to be some kind of energy conduit. The breaking point came when a Nexari reporter, her crystal skin flashing with colors that indicated annoyance, pushed through the crowd to confront the human delegation. Her voice was sharp and cutting as she spoke into her recording device. "Captain Lee," she said, her tone making it clear she thought his title was probably made up. "Every other civilization here has brought fleets and delegations appropriate to the magnitude of these territorial disputes. Can you explain to our viewers why humanity has sent what appears to be a skeleton crew?" Captain Lee stopped walking and turned to face her. The entire corridor seemed to go quiet as aliens pressed closer to hear his response. His answer was simple and delivered with the kind of calm confidence that comes from absolute certainty. "We brought exactly what we needed," he said, as if explaining something obvious to a child. The main conference hall was enormous, built to accommodate the massive size differences between the various alien species. At the center of the room sat 3 holographic models of star systems, each one spinning slowly and glowing with different colors to show the valuable resources hidden inside their planets and asteroids. These weren't just any star systems. Each one was loaded with quantum crystals that could power entire civilizations for centuries, plus rare Earth elements that were essential for building the most advanced technologies in the galaxy. Whoever controlled these systems would become incredibly wealthy and powerful. That's why 7 different alien civilizations had traveled across the galaxy to be here today, each one convinced they deserved to claim these treasures for themselves. The Vorthans went first and they didn't mess around. Their presentation was like watching a military parade mixed with a horror movie. Massive holographic displays filled the air above the conference table, showing fleet after fleet of their dark warships. The images were so detailed you could see individual weapon systems and count the number of troops packed inside each vessel. "We have conquered 47 star systems in the past century," announced General Korath, his voice booming through the hall like thunder. "Our military might is unquestioned. These systems will be ours because we have the strength to take them and hold them against any who would dare challenge us." The hologram shifted to show planets being bombarded from orbit, cities crumbling under the weight of Vorthan invasion forces. It was meant to be impressive, but it mostly just looked terrifying. The message was clear: Give us what we want, or this is what happens to you. The Nexari coalition came next, and their approach was completely different but equally intimidating. Instead of showing off weapons, they filled the room with complex, economic projections and mathematical models that made everyone's heads spin. Charts and graphs floated in the air, showing profit margins and resource extraction rates that seemed almost impossible to achieve. "We can strip mine an entire planet in 18 months, their lead economist announced proudly, as if destroying worlds was something to brag about. "Our efficiency rates are 300% higher than any other civilization. We will extract maximum value from these systems in minimum time." The holographic displays showed massive mining operations that could crack open planets like eggs, sucking out every valuable resource and leaving behind empty husks floating in space. It was efficient, but it was also completely destructive. One by one, each alien civilization made their presentation, and each one was more elaborate than the last. The Zephyrians brought artistic displays that turned their resource extraction plans into beautiful light shows. The Saurians demonstrated their mining technologies with holograms so realistic you could smell the burning metal. The Ethereals created floating symphonies of sound and color that somehow explained their economic theories. Each presentation took hours, filled with complicated charts, threatening military displays, and elaborate ceremonies that seemed designed more to impress the audience than actually solve the problem. The aliens were clearly trying to outdo each other, turning the negotiations into a competition to see who could put on the most spectacular show. Then it was humanity's turn. Ambassador Park stood up slowly, walked to the center of the room, and activated a small device that was so simple it looked like it might have come from a children's toy box. A basic holographic display appeared above the table, showing nothing more than simple star charts and mineral survey data. No fancy graphics, no threatening military displays, no complex economic models that required advanced degrees to understand. "The solution is obvious," she said in a calm, matter-of-fact voice, as if she was explaining why water flows downhill. "Equal access for all parties, proportional extraction limits based on current population needs, shared infrastructure costs split according to usage rates. Any other arrangement would be mathematically inefficient and economically wasteful." She spoke like she was reading from a textbook, completely unbothered by the fact that she had just suggested something that none of the other civilizations wanted to hear. Admiral Thok's laughter filled the command center like the sound of boulders crashing down a mountainside. His massive form shook with what passed for amusement among his kind, but there was nothing friendly about the sound. It was the kind of laugh that came right before something terrible happened to whoever had caused it. The human presentation had been the final straw. For hours, the alien civilizations had listened to Ambassador Park calmly explain why they should all just share the most valuable star systems in the galaxy, like children dividing up toys in a sandbox. The sheer audacity of it had left them speechless at first, but that shock had quickly turned into something much more dangerous: pure rage. "Did you hear that, creature?" snarled General Korath of the Vorthans, his black eyes gleaming with fury. "Equal access, shared costs, as if we're all equals in this galaxy." The Nexari representative, her crystal skin flashing angry red colors, was practically vibrating with indignation. "They suggest we treat them as partners when they can't even afford to bring a proper fleet to these negotiations. The insult is beyond measure. What happened next had never occurred in galactic history. 6 of the 7 alien civilizations, species that had been enemies for centuries, suddenly found themselves agreeing on something. Humanity needed to be taught a lesson about how the galaxy really worked. The alliance formed faster than anyone thought possible. Ancient grudges were temporarily set aside, territorial disputes were put on hold, and military commanders who had spent their careers planning each other's destruction were suddenly working together. All because 4 humans in a tiny ship had dared to suggest that maybe, just maybe, there was a better way to solve problems than threatening to blow each other up. The result was the largest military fleet ever assembled in galactic history. Over 10,000 warships from 6 different civilizations gathered at the edge of the star system, like a metallic storm cloud that blotted out the stars. Vorthan dreadnoughts floated next to Nexari crystal ships. Saurian battle cruisers formed up alongside ethereal energy vessels. Even the normally peaceful Kitinians had contributed their swarm fighters to the alliance. From a distance, the fleet looked like a city floating in space. The ships stretched across millions of kilometers, their combined firepower capable of reducing entire planets to cosmic dust. Running lights and weapon systems created a light show that could be seen from several star systems away. Admiral Thok stood on the bridge of his flagship, staring at tactical displays that showed the overwhelming force now under his command. The numbers were almost too large to comprehend. 10,000 ships, 50 million crew members, enough weapons to fight a war that could last for decades, and facing all of this was one small human ship that probably carried fewer than 100 people. The message he sent to the Resilience was broadcast on every frequency, transmitted in dozens of languages to make sure there was no possibility of misunderstanding. His voice carried the weight of absolute authority as he delivered. Humanity's ultimatum. Attention, human vessel. You will withdraw all territorial claims to the disputed star systems immediately. You will accept tributary status under our joint command, acknowledging the superior authority of the Galactic Alliance. You will submit to our terms without negotiation or condition. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in before delivering the threat that would surely bring humanity to its senses. If you refuse these generous terms, your single ship will be reduced to cosmic dust, and your species will learn the price of presumption. You have exactly 48 hours to consider mathematics that even humans should be able to understand. 10,000 ships versus 1. The equation is simple enough for any primitive mind to grasp. The alien commanders throughout the fleet watched their sensor displays with deep satisfaction. Finally, humanity would learn its place in the galactic order. Faced with such impossible odds, surely even the most stubborn humans would demonstrate the basic wisdom to surrender. Captain Lee sat in what could generously be called a command center, though it was smaller than most people's bedrooms back on Earth. The entire space was so cramped that if all 4 crew members stood up at the same time, they'd probably bump into each other. Compared to the massive alien command bridges with their soaring ceilings and hundreds of crew stations, the human ship's control room looked like it had been designed as an afterthought. The walls were lined with simple displays and basic control, panels that looked almost primitive next to the fancy holographic systems the aliens used. There were no dramatic captain's chairs or elevated platforms for making inspiring speeches, just 4 regular seats arranged around a small table that doubled as both a workspace and a place to eat meals. When Admiral Thok's ultimatum came through, the communication system, the message filled the tiny room with his booming voice. The sheer volume of it should have been terrifying. Here was the commander of the largest military fleet in galactic history, backed by 10,000 warships, giving humanity less than 2 days to surrender or face complete annihilation. Most species would have panicked. Any reasonable person would have immediately started sending emergency messages back to their homeworld, begging for military support, or at least some advice on how to survive the next 48 hours. The smart thing to do would have been to accept the aliens' terms and hope they were feeling merciful. Instead, Captain Lee calmly reached over and pressed a single button on a device that looked so ordinary it might have been mistaken for a coffee maker. The aliens had scanned the Resilience when it first arrived, but their sensors had dismissed this particular piece of equipment as some kind of basic life support system. It certainly didn't look like anything important. Admiral Thok, Lee, said into his communication system, his voice carrying the same tone someone might use to politely decline an invitation to a boring dinner party. We appreciate your impressive display of force, and we're truly grateful for your generous offer of surrender. However, we must respectfully decline. The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a pin drop across the entire alien fleet. 10,000 ships full of warriors and commanders who had never heard anyone respond to an ultimatum with such casual politeness. It was like watching someone calmly refuse to get out of the way of an oncoming avalanche. The response came quickly, transmitted from dozens of different ships as alien commanders struggled to understand what they had just heard. The messages overlapped and mixed together in a chaos of confused voices, all asking the same basic question. Had the humans completely lost their minds? How does one ship intend to face 10,000? Admiral Thok's voice cut through the noise, no longer amused but genuinely puzzled. Do you possess some weapon we cannot detect? Some defensive technology beyond our understanding? Captain Lee's answer came with the kind of patience that teachers use when explaining basic math to struggling students. He spoke slowly and clearly, making sure every word was understood across the language barriers. Admiral, I think there's been a misunderstanding about what kind of ship this is. The Resilience isn't a warship. We don't have any fancy weapons or secret defensive systems. We're not here to fight anyone. He paused, letting that information sink in before delivering the part that would change everything. The Resilience is a communication relay, Admiral, the most advanced quantum transmission system humanity has ever built, and we've been broadcasting everything that's happened. Here, every word of your ultimatum, every threat you've made, every ship in your fleet, it's all been transmitted instantly across space to Earth and every human colony in the galaxy. The device he had activated wasn't a weapon or a shield generator. It was something much more powerful than either, a way to talk to the rest of humanity faster than the speed of light itself. Everyone back home has been watching this entire time, Lee continued conversationally. And I have to say they're very interested in your response to our diplomatic proposals. Ambassador Park smiled gently as she reached for her simple control panel, the kind of expression a grandmother might wear while showing family photos to visitors. Her fingers moved across the basic buttons with practiced ease, and suddenly every screen, monitor and display throughout the massive alien space station flickered to life. What appeared on those screens made every alien in the station stop what they were doing and stare in complete silence. The first image showed Earth's orbital shipyards, and they were unlike anything the aliens had ever seen. Massive construction facilities stretched across hundreds of kilometers of space, each one big enough to build entire fleets simultaneously. But what caught everyone's attention wasn't the size of the shipyards. It was how busy they were. Thousands of workers swarmed over partially completed vessels that made the largest alien dreadnoughts look like toys. Sparks flew as welding teams worked around the clock. Massive cranes moved hull sections that weighed millions of tons, and assembly lines churned out smaller ships at a pace that seemed impossible. The whole operation looked like a giant ant colony that had been stirred up with a stick. Every word of your ultimatum has been transmitted instantly to Earth and 47 colonial governments, Ambassador Park explained in the same calm tone she might use to describe the weather. We thought you should see their response. The screens shifted to show other human worlds, and the pattern was the same everywhere. Colony after colony was mobilizing for war, but not in the desperate, panicked way the aliens had expected. This was organized, methodical, and clearly something humanity had prepared for long ago. Mars showed underground bases opening like flowers, revealing launch bays that had been hidden beneath the planet's surface for who knows how long. Massive. Doors that looked like they were part of the natural rock formations slid apart, and ships began emerging from what everyone had thought was just empty desert. The outer colonies were even more impressive. Worlds that the aliens had dismissed as farming planets or mining outposts were suddenly bristling with defensive platforms and military installations. Space elevators that the aliens had assumed were for moving cargo were actually launching fully armed warships at a rate of one every few minutes. But the most shocking thing was the numbers. The Alien Alliance had been proud of their 10,000 ships, thinking it was the largest fleet ever assembled. What they were seeing on the screens now made their entire armada look like a small patrol group. Hundreds of thousands of human vessels were mobilizing across dozens of star systems. Not hundreds, not thousands, hundreds of thousands. Ships that ranged from small fighters to massive dreadnoughts that were so large they had their own gravitational fields. Some of the human ships were emerging from what appeared to be completely empty space, as if they had been hiding in dimensions the aliens didn't even know existed. Others were materializing near asteroid fields and nebulae where the alien sensors had detected nothing unusual just days before. The most terrifying part was how different the human ships looked compared to anything else in the galaxy. While Alien vessels were built for intimidation and display, covered in spikes and aggressive angles. The human ships looked almost elegant in their simplicity, clean lines, smooth surfaces, and a kind of quiet efficiency that suggested they were built by people who understood that form should follow function. These weren't ships built to look scary. They were ships built to be effective. Admiral Thok watched the displays with growing horror, his four eyes tracking the endless stream of human vessels, appearing on screen after screen. The tactical part of his mind was already running calculations, and the numbers were becoming impossible to ignore. This is not possible," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of his own rapid breathing. "How many ships do you have?" Ambassador Park checked her data pad as if she was looking up a simple piece of information. Active military vessels, around 800,000, give or take, but those are just the ones we keep ready for immediate deployment. Commander Kim slowly stood up from his chair, and as if his movement had triggered something across the galaxy, every gravitational sensor in the star system suddenly went crazy. Alarms that had never been designed to handle readings. This extreme began screaming warnings in dozens of different alien languages. The sound was so loud and chaotic that it drowned out conversations throughout the massive space station. The aliens manning the sensor stations stared at their displays in complete confusion. The readings they were getting didn't make sense according to everything they knew about physics. Space itself seemed to be bending and twisting in ways that should have been impossible, like someone was folding reality the way you might fold a piece of paper. Then they saw why. At the very edge of the star system, where empty space had been just moments before, something was materializing out of nothing. Not arriving through normal space travel, not jumping out of hyperspace the way every other species did. Actually forming from what looked like ripples in the fabric of space itself. The first human battle group appeared like ghosts becoming solid, and the aliens immediately understood they had made a terrible mistake in their calculations. Each human ship was enormous, dwarfing even the largest vessels in the alien alliance. The smallest human destroyer was bigger than most alien cruisers, and their battleships were so massive they looked like mobile space stations. But size wasn't the most frightening thing about them. It was how wrong they looked compared to everything. The aliens thought they knew about spacecraft design. Human ships moved without visible engines, changing direction and speed in ways that violated basic physics. They seemed to treat gravity like a suggestion rather than a law, bending space around them to create their own rules about how objects should behave in the universe. "We learned something important in our early wars," Commander Kim said in the same casual tone someone might use to discuss their favorite restaurant. He spoke as if massive warships materializing from folded space was just another Tuesday afternoon. "Bringing overwhelming force to negotiations suggests you're afraid your position won't stand on its merits." More human ships kept arriving, and each new group was more impossible than the last. Some vessels phased in and out of normal space, like they were testing whether they felt like existing in this dimension today. Others appeared to be hovering in several different locations at the same time, as if they had decided that being in only one place was inefficient. The alien commanders watched their tactical displays with growing terror as the numbers kept climbing. First dozens of human ships, then hundreds, then thousands. Each vessel broadcast power signatures that made the alien alliance's combined firepower look like fireworks compared to nuclear weapons. "True strength," Kim continued, completely ignoring the fact that his words were being heard across a fleet of terrified alien warriors, "means being confident enough in your capabilities that a single messenger ship is sufficient." The human ships weren't just arriving randomly. They were taking positions in a formation so complex that the alien tactical computers couldn't even analyze it properly. It was like trying to understand a symphony when you could only hear individual notes. There was clearly a pattern, but it was operating on a level beyond alien comprehension. Some of the human vessels were doing things that hurt to look at directly. They seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, casting shadows that fell in directions where there was no light source. Others appeared to be made of materials that reflected starlight in colors that didn't exist in the normal spectrum. The most unsettling part was how quiet they were. The alien alliance had announced their arrival with dramatic displays of power, weapons charging, engines roaring, and communication channels full of threatening messages. The human fleet appeared in complete silence, like predators that didn't need to announce themselves because their mere presence was threat enough. Admiral Thok's tactical officer, a young Krex who had graduated at the top of his military academy class, stared at his instruments with the expression of someone watching. Everything he had ever learned become instantly obsolete. "Admiral," he whispered, his voice shaking with the kind of fear that comes from understanding you're completely outmatched. "Their smallest escort ship is reading power levels higher than our entire fleet combined." The human ships continued their impossible arrival, bending space and time around them like artists working with clay, while 10,000 alien vessels sat frozen in formation, suddenly feeling very small and very alone in the vast darkness of space. Admiral Thok's massive hands gripped the edge of his command console so tightly that the metal began to bend under the pressure. His four eyes darted frantically between multiple tactical displays, each one showing him something that should have been impossible, according to everything he had learned in 50 years of military service. The human ships weren't just moving through space, they were rewriting the rules of how space worked. One moment a massive human dreadnought would be floating peacefully near a distant moon, and the next instant it would simply appear next to an asteroid field on the opposite side of the system. Not traveling there, not jumping through hyperspace, just deciding that it wanted to be somewhere else and making it happen. "How are they doing this?" whispered his tactical officer, a veteran warrior who had survived battles against a dozen different alien species. His voice carried the kind of awe usually reserved for religious experiences. "They're not using any propulsion systems we can detect, no energy signatures that match any known technology." Another human ship caught their attention by doing something. That made several alien scientists aboard the station start hyperventilating. The vessel seemed to stretch itself across several light minutes of space, becoming impossibly long and thin, before snapping back to normal size in a completely different location. It was like watching someone play with reality itself, as if it were made of rubber. The gravitational sensors had given up trying to make sense of what they were detecting. Human ships were creating artificial gravity wells, bending space around themselves in ways that turned basic physics into abstract art. Some vessels appeared to be moving backward through time, arriving at their destinations before they had finished leaving their starting points. But the most terrifying thing wasn't what the human ships could do, it was how effortlessly they did it. There was no strain, no visible effort, no signs of advanced technology working at maximum capacity. They manipulated the fundamental forces of the universe with the same casual ease that most people use to turn on a light switch. "Sir," reported another officer, his voice barely a whisper, "the energy readings from their smallest escort ship are higher than our entire fleet combined. And that appears to be just their idle power output. We're not even seeing what they can do when they try." Admiral Thok felt something he hadn't experienced since he was a young soldier facing his first battle. Pure, overwhelming fear. Not just concern about losing a fight, but the bone-deep terror that comes from realizing you're not just outmatched, you're operating in a completely different category of existence. The alien alliance, which had seemed so powerful just hours ago, now looked like children playing with toy boats in a bathtub while aircraft carriers circled overhead. 10,000 ships that represented the combined military, might have 6 civilizations, and they might as well have been armed with slingshots. "Why?" Thok's voice cracked as he transmitted directly to the human ship, abandoning all pretense of military protocol. "Why didn't you reveal this power earlier? Why let us make fools of ourselves? Why endure our insults and threats when you could have ended this with a simple demonstration?" The response came not from Captain Lee or Ambassador Park, but from Engineer Yoon, who looked up from her datapad with the kind of genuine surprise that someone might show when asked why they hadn't mentioned they could breathe. "We hoped negotiation would be sufficient," she said, speaking as if this should have been obvious to everyone involved. Her tone carried no condescension, no smugness, just the patient explanation of someone stating a simple fact. "Violence has always been humanity's last resort, not our first choice." She paused, looking back at her datapad, as if checking some routine calculation, before adding the words that would be quoted in alien history books for the next 1,000 years. "We prefer building to breaking, Admiral. It's more efficient in the long term, and honestly, it's just better for everyone involved. Why destroy something when you can create something better instead?" The simplicity of her answer somehow made it even more devastating. She wasn't boasting about human superiority or threatening further displays of power. She was just explaining why humanity had chosen to try diplomacy first, the way someone might explain why they preferred to use a door instead of breaking down a wall. The collapse of the alien alliance happened faster than anyone thought possible. Within just a few hours of seeing the human fleet demonstrate their impossible technologies, the same species that had sworn eternal brotherhood in their hatred of humanity were suddenly tripping over each other to accept the original peace proposal. Admiral Thark was the first to break, his massive form hunched over his communication console as he transmitted directly to the Resilience. His voice, which had boomed with confidence and threats just hours earlier, now carried the shaky tone of someone who had looked death in the face and barely escaped. The Krek's hegemony. "We accept the human proposal," he stammered, his four eyes unable to meet the camera. "Equal access, shared costs, proportional extraction. We find these terms acceptable." The Vorthans followed within minutes, their proud military commanders suddenly discovering a deep respect for diplomatic solutions. The Nexari, who had spent centuries believing their crystal technology made them superior to all other life forms, transmitted their acceptance so quickly that the message was barely coherent. One by one, each member of the alliance that had threatened to reduce humanity to cosmic dust found urgent reasons to embrace the resource-sharing agreement that Ambassador Park had proposed 3 days earlier. The same plan they had mocked as naive and impossible was suddenly the greatest diplomatic achievement in galactic history. The massive human fleet, which had appeared from folded space and bent reality around itself like a cosmic magic trick, began to fade away as quietly as it had arrived. Ships that had demonstrated casual mastery over the fundamental forces of the universe simply phased back into whatever impossible dimensions they had come from. Some vessels disappeared by stretching themselves across space until they became too thin to see. Others seemed to fold in on themselves like origami being reversed until they were just geometric points that winked out of existence. A few simply decided to stop existing in this particular version of reality and faded away like morning mist. Captain Lee watched the departure through the Resilience's simple viewports, making notes on the same basic datapad he had carried since the beginning. The small human crew prepared to leave aboard the same modest corvette that had arrived 3 days earlier, as if nothing particularly unusual had happened. Ambassador Park activated the communication system one final time, her calm voice carrying across the star system to every alien government that was still trying to process what they had witnessed. "Humanity sent one ship because we believed in the possibility of peace," she said, speaking with the same gentle patience she had shown throughout the entire crisis. "We were prepared for the alternative, but we hoped it wouldn't be necessary. The choice was always yours to make." Her words carried no triumph, no gloating about humanity's overwhelming victory. She spoke like a teacher explaining a lesson to students who had finally understood a difficult concept. There was even a hint of sadness in her voice, as if she was genuinely disappointed that the demonstration had been necessary at all. The Resilience departed as quietly as it had arrived, its small engines barely registering on the alien sensors that had dismissed it as insignificant just days before. The same ship that had been mocked and ridiculed by an entire galaxy now left behind a collection of alien civilizations that would spend years trying to understand what had just happened to them. In the immediate aftermath, alien news networks struggled to explain the events to their audiences. Military analysts who had confidently predicted humanity's destruction found themselves trying to describe technologies that seemed to violate the basic laws of physics. Diplomatic experts who had dismissed the human proposal as naive now praised it as the work of brilliant strategic minds. But perhaps the most telling change was in how the aliens talked about the human ship itself. The same vessel they had called a pizza delivery ship and a cosmic joke was now referred to with the kind of respectful awe usually reserved for natural disasters or divine interventions. In the years that followed, alien historians would write extensively about the day when humanity revealed its true power to the galaxy. But they would always note that humanity's greatest victory had been won not by the fleet that could have destroyed them all, but by the single ship that chose not to. The resilience had indeed been enough.